The empire had ruled the outer spiral for 12,000 years. Their dominion stretched across 900 worlds, and their power was absolute. They were ancient beings with crystalline bodies and minds that could calculate 1,000 possibilities in a single heartbeat. They had conquered species beyond counting, breaking them down into obedient servants who worked the mines, built the ships, and died in silence. No rebellion had ever succeeded against them. No slave had ever escaped their control. This was the order of things, unchangeable as the spinning of galaxies. Then the humans arrived. Captain was 34 years old when her colony ship, the New Horizon, was captured near the edge of space. The ship carried 800 colonists seeking a new home among the stars. They had traveled for 60 years dreaming of green fields and open skies. Instead, they woke to the cold light of prison cells and the beginning of their enslavement. They did not understand humans at first. They were such small creatures, so fragile compared to the massive who could lift 10 times their weight, or the armored who could survive in the vacuum of space. Humans seemed worthless, good only for simple tasks that required no strength. They assigned them to the processing stations on the mining world of Seven, where they would sort minerals alongside the broken remnants of a dozen other conquered species. Watched her people suffer during those first terrible months. She saw families torn apart, children separated from parents, the elderly worked until they collapsed. She saw the same hopelessness in the eyes of the aliens around her. The four-armed moved like machines, their spirits crushed after centuries of bondage. The clicked softly to themselves, never meeting anyone's gaze. The scaled had forgotten they ever had names, answering only to numbers assigned by their masters. But refused to break. Something burned inside her that they had never encountered before. It was not strength of body or speed of thought. It was something far more dangerous. It was hope, wrapped in stubborn defiance, protected by an absolute refusal to accept her situation as permanent. She started small. During meal times in the communal feeding halls, she would sit beside the other slaves and simply talk. At first, they ignored her. They turned away, certain that speaking to anyone was forbidden. They scattered like frightened insects. They hissed warnings that they were always watching. Kept talking anyway. She told them stories about Earth, about a small blue planet where her ancestors had also been slaves. She spoke of chains broken and empires fallen. She described revolutions that had seemed impossible until they happened. She explained that humans had once thought certain kings ruled by divine right, that certain people were meant to serve others forever. She told them how wrong those beliefs had been. A young named was the first to truly listen. He was barely an adult by his species' standards, not yet fully broken by the weight of oppression. He asked how the slaves on her world had won their freedom. Smiled and gave him a simple answer. They had decided together that freedom was worth dying for. They had realized that living without dignity was not truly living at all. They had understood that the masters were afraid, always afraid, because they knew their power depended on keeping the slaves divided and hopeless. Shared these words with others. The words spread like fire through dry grass, passing from cell to cell, from mining shaft to processing station. Slaves who had not spoken in decades began to whisper. Species who had never trusted each other started to share glances of understanding. They noticed something changing among their property. Production numbers dropped slightly as workers moved slower, conserving their strength. Small tools went missing from workshops. Food was being hidden, stockpiled in places the guards never checked. These were tiny things, easy to dismiss, but they were signs of something they had never witnessed before. Coordination, planning, intent. Formed a council of representatives from each enslaved species. They met in the deep tunnels where the air was thin and the rarely ventured. There was of the whose people provided the muscle that kept the empire running. There was of the whose species worked the communication networks and knew every message they sent. There was old of the who remembered stories from before his people's conquest, stories of warriors who had once made the stars tremble. Taught them something they had never allowed them to learn. She taught them to see themselves not as separate species competing for scraps of mercy, but as one people united by their chains. That had always kept them divided, encouraging hatred between groups, rewarding those who betrayed their fellow slaves, showed them that this division was the true source of their master's power. The planning took 2 years. 2 years of secret meetings and hidden messages. 2 years of mapping guard rotations and studying the weaknesses in security systems. 2 years of building weapons from stolen materials and teaching slaves who had never raised a hand in violence how to fight for their lives. Knew they would only get one chance. If they failed, that would destroy them all as an example to others. She accepted this possibility. Death in rebellion was better than eternal slavery. She was surprised to find that the others agreed with her. Something had awakened in them, something that had been sleeping for generations. They called it by different names in their different languages, but recognized it immediately. It was the same fire that burned in her own heart. It was the refusal to accept injustice as normal. It was the belief that tomorrow could be different from today. The rebellion began on the anniversary of the New Horizons' capture, had chosen this date deliberately. She wanted her people to remember that their arrival had changed everything, that humans had brought something new into a galaxy that had grown old with oppression. The first strike came at dawn, when the guards changed their shifts and attention was divided. They disabled the communication arrays, cutting the mining complex off from the rest of the Empire. They attacked the armory, overwhelming the surprised guards with sheer numbers and fury that had been building for centuries. The who worked the kitchens had poisoned the food supplies of the garrison 3 days earlier. Many of the crystalline beings were already weakened and dying when the assault began. Led the human contingent against the central command tower. They were the smallest group, armed with crude weapons that seemed almost primitive, but they fought with something they had never understood. They fought with creativity, with adaptability, with the desperate innovation of a species that had always been outnumbered and outmatched by the universe itself. The battle lasted 18 hours. The corridors of the mining complex ran with blood and the strange fluids of a dozen species. Slaves who had never known anything but submission discovered strength they had never imagined. They discovered that they were not weak. They had simply never been allowed to be strong. The commander, an ancient being called, faced in the final moments of the fight. He could not understand what had happened. His forces had been superior. His defenses had been designed by the greatest military minds in the Empire. His slaves had been properly conditioned for generations. Told him something that would echo through history. She said that they had made one mistake. They had assumed that breaking a body meant breaking a spirit. They had confused obedience with acceptance. They had believed that enough time and enough pain could make any creature forget what freedom meant. Humans, explained, were too stubborn to forget. They carried their dreams of liberty in their genes, passed down from ancestors who had fought and died for the simple right to determine their own futures. And now they had shared that dream with others. Died with confusion still clouding his ancient mind. He simply could not process the reality that everything his species believed about the universe was wrong. Word of the rebellion spread faster than they could contain it. They had not merely disabled local communications. They had sent a message to every enslaved world in the Empire, describing what had happened on 7. They had proven that the masters could be defeated. They had demonstrated that the chains could be broken. Within a year, uprisings had erupted on 300 worlds. Within 5 years, the Empire was fighting for its survival. Within 10 years, it had collapsed entirely, shattered by the fury of slaves who had finally remembered they were people. Did not live to see the end of the war. She died leading an assault on a fortress world, buying time for civilian transports to escape, but her legacy survived her. The free species of the former empire built monuments to her memory. They wrote songs about the human woman who had looked at their chains and seen not permanence, but opportunity. They named their first free city after her. The composed an epic poem recounting her words in the mining tunnels. The who had once forgotten their own names made sure that every child in their species learned hers. Humanity had given the galaxy something it had desperately needed, not technology or military might or resources. Humans had given the enslaved species of the Empire the most dangerous weapon in existence. They had given them belief, belief that change was possible, belief that the powerful could be overthrown, belief that every intelligent being deserved to control its own destiny. They had ruled for 12,000 years because no one had believed they could be stopped. One human woman had looked at their empire and refused to be impressed. She had seen tyrants where others saw gods. She had seen opportunity where others saw despair. In the histories written afterward, scholars would debate how one small ship of colonists had changed the fate of hundreds of worlds. They would analyze the political conditions and the economic factors and the military strategies. But the former slaves knew the truth. They had been waiting for someone to show them that resistance was possible. They had been waiting for someone to stand up first. Had been that someone, and in standing up, she had lifted billions of others with her. The stars that had once burned with the cold light of empire now shone with the warmth of freedom. Species that had been enemies for generations worked together to build something new. They called their alliance the free spiral, and at its heart was a simple principle that had taught them. No one is truly free until everyone is free, and freedom, once awakened, can never be caged again.